Hey, I'm Chicken Johnny, and in a few moments I'm going to take you out into the garden. We're going to talk about fertilizer, how to fertilize, why to fertilize, and when to fertilize. So if you're interested, stay tuned. We're going out to the garden right now. Hey, hit the subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up. So we're going to break this down into 3 steps. First of all, we're going to answer the question, why fertilize? Secondly, we're going to answer the question, when should I fertilize? And the final question, and maybe the most important, is how should I fertilize? So here's why. Whenever you pick a vegetable or pick a fruit out of your garden, or you cut a flower and take it into the house, you're depleting the ground from necessary elements. And there are 17 necessary elements. We have to replace all of those essentials, all 17 of them, back to the levels that the garden needs to grow and to thrive and survive. Also, your ground might have started deficient of certain nutrients. Your ground may not have what it takes. Chicken Johnny's ground has what it takes. I've got 24% organic matter in the first 14 inches of my soil. I've got soil tests to prove it. So today I want to show you and tell you how to do that. The first thing, the best way, is to start with a soil test. Now there's some pretty good YouTube videos on how to read a soil test. Just Google those. Maybe one day I'll do a video on reading a soil test, but I wouldn't wait for that. I'd Google reading a soil test. So where do you go for a soil test? Well, your local extension, gardening extension, your local agricultural extension will be able to either do the soil test for you or direct you to one of the extension universities that will do the soil test, maybe not free, but it's not real expensive. I think we pay somewhere around $25 per test, and we'll do several different tests. You take ground from different places and you put it into one test bag. But we specifically test 3 different areas of our operation. There are 3 different fields, and we test those independently. Additionally, plants may not fruit if they don't have the proper amendments in the soil. If you've got too much nitrogen, for example, sweet potatoes won't even form tubers. Tomatoes might not give you any fruit at all. You might just end up with a bunch of green foliage, which can look nice, especially in the case of sweet potatoes. You'll think you're going to have a great crop, but you don't get any sweet potatoes. Certain elements, certain nutrients aren't available to the plants. Even if they're in the soil, they're not available to the plants. They're locked up in the soil, and they need other elements, trace elements, to release those elements. So feeding your soil, for many reasons, is an important, is an important aspect of gardening. Hey, while we're out here, let me give you a peek at the garlic that we planted. I don't know if that's picking up on the camera or not, but that's the garlic. I really didn't expect that much growth this fall. I hope they'll be all right when the ground freezes. So that's why we fertilize. We fertilize to replenish the nutrients that we've taken out, and we fertilize to bring the soil up to the minimum requirements necessary for plant growth. So when do we fertilize? There's really 5 different times that we want to fertilize the soil. The first time that you want to fertilize soil is in the fall of the year, not in the spring. You'll fertilize in the spring as well, but your first fertilization is in the fall. The reason why you want to fertilize in the fall is because that's your safest fertilizers. You can put everything from grass clippings to leaves. You don't want to put sticks or that kind of thing that hasn't been composted, but you can put non-comp or uncomposted grass. You can put uncomposted leaves. Incorporate those into the first couple inches of the soil, as deep as 7 inches really. It will still be available to your plants. And that organic matter will decomp over the winter time and be ready for your plants in the spring of the year after you plant. Now, in the spring of the year, you're going to also be able to fertilize. And you're going to want to fertilize then using an organic fertilizer. The very first time I'm able to get out into the field is when I put well-composted horse manure into the field. I compost that horse manure for about 3 years before I spread it on the garden. This way, I know that there's no weed seeds that are alive in it, and I know that manure is not going to be so hot that it's going to burn the soil. Those are your first 2 fertilizers, fall and spring, and they're going to be an organic fertilizer. Things like compost, things like manures, well-composted manure. And you really can't overdo it at that point. In other words, the ground is going to accept that compost, that organic mass, and it's going to utilize it. Now, if you're planting cover crops and you're plowing them in the fall or in the spring, that would take care of that fertilizer addition. The next time you're going to want to worry about fertilizing is when you're planting the plants. And you want to get a little bit of nitrogen, or quite a bit of nitrogen, down into the soil when you're first planting your plants. Now, this can be a synthetic nitrogen, something like ammonium sulfate, which your ammonias are used by the plant very quickly. You have to be careful not to put a great deal of ammonia on the soil. And then there's nitrate nitrogen fertilizers, and they're solids and they take a little bit longer to compost in the ground, and it's a little harder to over fertilize with nitrate. However, you also want to get a little phosphorus and a little potassium into the soil. So my first side dressing of my plants, right after I plant, I'll put down an NPK fertilizer. N is nitrogen, P is phosphorus, and K is potassium. I use a 15-15-15. That's a balance. That means that 15% of the material in the bag is nitrogen, 15% is phosphorus, and 15% is potassium. I like to use 15-15-15 because it spreads a little bit easier with the equipment that I have. But 10-10-10, 2-2-2, 5-5-5, it doesn't matter. It's the percentage of the product which is nitrogen, potassium, well, phosphorus, and potassium. And it really doesn't matter what the rates are as long as you put them on your garden in a sufficient manner to get enough, but not too much. So read the labeling on the bag, but also refer to your soil test and see what you're short. The fourth time you want to fertilize is when the plants begin to flower. Now you want to make sure that you're getting plenty of phosphorus. That's going to feed the roots. The roots are then going to feed the flowers. And then the fifth and final fertilization is going to be when you put down potassium. And potassium can be put down in many different ways of doing it. Potash is one of them. Potash actually is potassium is the Latin term for potash, but potash is going to help feed the fruit. Nitrogen feeds the top of the plant, all of the foliage, and causes the stems to become thick and heavy and healthy. Phosphorus feeds the roots of the plant and allows the plant to have plenty of ability to pick up nutrients and bring them into the plant. And potassium strengthens the cell structure of the plant. Well, I've come inside to film the remainder of this because it just got too windy outside. I apologize for the poor audio. So all that remains to answer is, how do we fertilize? Well, the fall and the spring fertilizing is done, well, it's a both and or an either or. So we're going to do it with organic material. We're going to use compost, horse manure, cow manure, whatever you might have that contains organic matter. Now you want to compost it before you put it onto your garden. I compost my horse manure for 3 years before it goes out on the garden. We compost sticks and leaves and branches, and we compost all of the material, the vegetables that aren't sold at market, that can't be used because they've either wilted or we just can't consume them. We just don't have space for them. All of that goes onto a compost pile. It's composted and it can be used for fertilizer after it's been in the compost pile for several years. Now, you can either spread that all out on the fall or you can spread it out in the spring. Non-composted material has to be spread in the fall. You have to give it the winter to decompose and create compost in the soil. The reason I do both is because if I put down material in the fall, let it compost, that material is probably available to the plants almost right away. Whereas if I put compost out in the spring, it takes a while for the mycorrhizal fungi to mix up into that compost and start making it available to the plants. The other 3 fertilizings, the first one, I'm going to side dress my newly planted seedlings with a balanced NPK fertilizer. Now, best case, it's also going to have micronutrients in it, trace elements, things like copper, nickel, iron, sulfur, and we'll side dress the plants with them right after we plant them. Then the third application of fertilizer is put down using a little bit heavier phosphorus. So I might put down something like a 3-10-7 or a 3-10-5 fertilizer. You've still got some potassium, you've still got some nitrogen, but you're primarily putting down phosphorus. And then your fifth and final is going to be primarily phosphorus. I might put something down like potash. So how do we do it? Well, the first 2 we're just going to put down on the soil and incorporate it with the rototiller. We're going to cover the whole ground with it. It's all organic, so it doesn't matter to me how much I put down as long as I get enough. I really can't over fertilize at that point. But when I side dress, I'm going to specifically hit the plants, and I'm going to hit each variety when it needs to be hit. So I may not fertilize my winter squash at the same time as I fertilize beans or peas. And onions, for example, I'm going to be very specific on how I fertilize them. I'm going to fertilize at planting using a 15-15-15. I'm going to fertilize one more time. There's no flowering really that I'm going to look for. Anytime an onion plant starts to flower, from now on I'm just going to cut those off. They just create problems with the onion bulb later. So if you just cut off those onion seed heads, you won't have that problem. But at about that point, about 3 weeks prior to the longest day of summer, I'm going to put down my second fertilizer, which is primarily phosphorus. And actually I could put down a 15-15-15 at that point. It really wouldn't make much of a difference. But once the onions begin to bulb, now I'm going to make sure that I put down something that is high in phosphorus and high in potassium. There's some other plants that have some unique fertilizing needs, like we put borax or boron down on beets, and that helps to with the flavor of the beets, but it also helps to guard against black spots that form sometimes on the beets if you've got a boron deficiency. We're going to spread some sulfur in on our third fertilizing, and that sulfur will help to unlock some of the locked up phosphorus and potassium in the soil. Well, I don't want to get overcomplicated with this. I just wanted to give you kind of an idea of what we do and how we fertilize, and why we use some organic methods and some non-organic methods. I wouldn't want to use a synthetic fertilizer as a broadcast fertilizer on the whole field. The reason being, commercial fertilizers are water soluble. So once you put it down, you have to sprinkle or hope for some rain to incorporate that fertilizer into the soil. And the problem is, if you get too much moisture, that fertilizer will wash down into the conifers and it'll get into the water system. So you really want to be very careful to just put a side dressing of commercial fertilizer. You can do this with a dry fertilizer, or you can do it with a liquid fertilizer. If you want to do it organically, there's things like kelp and fish mash fertilizer. We will often take the little goose pond or duck pond that we have, and this year in the spring we drained that out on our seed beds, and I think we put a lot of nitrogen into the seed beds. In fact, we stirred up so much nitrogen in that pond that it got a level of algae on it that was quite thick. So listen, if you've been watching this and you enjoy this kind of content, you want to see more of it, hit the subscribe button down below, hit that thumbs up button, ring the bell, you'll be notified of future videos, and by all means, please leave a comment. If you disagree, disagree nicely, but go ahead and do it. And if you agree, well, just give the thumbs up and tell me what you're doing on your farm or your garden to fertilize and how you go about it. Thanks. I'm Chicken Johnny. Mitzvah Shem. I'll see you again. Eat your vegetables.